the UK emissions trading scheme, and how its application to energy from waste will change the waste management sector and affect independent waste firms. A big thank you to Advetec, our sponsor for today, without whom this would not be possible. So this session is very much here as a learning session for you and me both. There's a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen in Zoom, so please do send any questions as they come through, and we will deal them as much as we can. So the emission trading scheme, as I've discovered, is a very technical subject about which many independent waste management companies might not have a handle on how it will affect their business. I and those listening will be learning together from the panel, who are the experts, and let me introduce them. We have Colin Church, the Chief Executive of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining. He moved there in late 2018 from the CIWM. Prior to that role, Colin spent over 20 years in the UK government working on a range of issues at the borders of science, engineering and policy. He's also chair of the Green Alliance Circular Economy Task Force. Samantha Riggs is a criminal defence barrister and member of CIWM, specialising in defending companies and directors in environmental, financial and regulatory matters. She provides early stage advice in corporate and regulatory investigations and is experienced in working with experts in technical aspects. She's also currently co-authoring with other waste experts a practical guide to waste management law. Emma Beale is Managing Director of the West London Waste Authority, and before that was Head of Public Sector Development at Suez. She's been on both sides of the fence between the contractor and contractee, and has negotiated all sorts of contracts, including on gasification, AD technologies. And Dr. Stephen Wise is Chief Strategic Development Officer at Advetec. He's familiar with most waste treatment technologies, having been involved either with their design or operation, and has held senior roles with waste operators and consultancies in operations, business development, engineering, and general management, and has supported projects within the UK and globally. Welcome to you all. So before we start, I'm going to have a brief outline of what we're talking about today. So under ETS, businesses, this is a very, very rough outline. Businesses buy and sell allowances for every tonne of emissions they produce each year, and it's been running in the UK, first of all under an EU scheme, but then it became part of into UK law following Brexit. So those that reduce emissions can sell spare allowances to those that do not. An overall carbon cap is then set and reduced over time, and the idea is to stimulate markets to provide net zero alternatives. Energy from waste is to be brought within the UK scheme from 2028 after a phased-in session. The UK scheme was set up to replace the EU scheme, which we were previously signed up to, and as applies to many other sectors already. So the waste sector is a newcomer. The Environmental Services Association has said that, including EFW under the scheme, was the most significant regulatory intervention to the waste industry in a generation, and one that would change the sector's economics. It will also involve new regulations and ways of working, yet more pitfalls for companies to avoid in a highly regulated sector. So we'll be asking and hopefully answering the question, how will independent waste management operators adapt in this new environment? Well, to start this rather large topic, I'm going to invite each speaker to for an opening statement. What is your understanding of ETS and how it will be applied to the waste sector? And what challenges do independent firms face? Perhaps Emma, perhaps I can start with you.
Yep, certainly. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So working in the public sector now, but also some reflections on, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago when I was running commercial waste depots and working out pricing strategies. It seems to me it's actually not that different. What's needed. It's all about what's in the waste and who's in your supply chain, and at what point in that supply chain are you going to be separating out the things that are either opportunistic or detrimental in terms of costs. So we have a task every day of trying to persuade our customers, the residents, to separate more. And it's exactly the same at our small transfer stations with the traders that come in and deposit waste. It's that level of separation. So for me, there's two big risks really. One is that the energy from waste operators just apply blanket charges and everybody gets hit with the same price, and there's no ability, no scope for movement in order to get the best out of ETS and actually deliver the objectives of it. And the other risk is that customers won't separate. So what can we do in order to support them in the pricing strategies? So that's where we focus our attention. And what we've been doing is looking at what's in our waste stream for the last 7 years at West London Waste, so that when ETS comes in, but also EPR, simpler recycling, other sort of legislation, biodegradable waste to landfill bans, things like that, when that comes in, what actually changes in what's coming in to our waste, so that we've got the previous information and we know then what we need to do going forwards.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. Samantha, perhaps I could come to you, because from your perspective, you're looking at the legal aspects of this. Yeah, I mean, what's the main impact you think on independent waste operators as your introductory statement?
I would say they need to be prepared. Don't think 2028, we've got lots of time to get ready for this. I think you need to be prepared and start planning ahead. That would be my key message, because we all know how long it can take for permit variations. If you need to change your existing operations to get you ready, then that can take time. You need to obviously have a permit under the scheme, and just to be prepared, because there are some hefty civil sanctions that can be imposed if you're not.
Excellent, and we'll certainly come to that later. I think it might be a bit of a shock to a lot of people to understand that. Stephen, perhaps I can come to you. The same sort of opening challenges that the firms face, and your understanding of how ETS will be applied.
Thanks, Corinne. Yeah, I think we work a lot with some of the smaller independent waste handlers and waste operators, and I think one of the things they need to be prepared for, and it sort of follows on from what both Emma and Sam have said, is that they are going to be hit with some form of increase in their price. They're going to be hit with additional regulation. And we know that quite often the smaller companies are head down, getting on with doing their day-to-day job, and they need to do that to keep going. But they need to really lift their head up here and look at what's coming, how it's going to impact them, and how they can make changes to their business to take that into account. Be that looking at Emma said, do they look at further segregation with their industrial and commercial customers? Do they look at putting in innovation to deal with some of their waste streams that they can't then segregate easily or treat? And all of these changes, as Sam said, takes time. You can't just overnight change to how you're collecting or what you're doing. It all takes time to work through the system. So they really need to be thinking about it now. And I think the other thing that will happen, that typically as smaller companies that hold less leverage in the marketplace, so putting into a treatment facility, they may well be disproportionately hit in terms of that price increase as well, which they're going to have to absorb or pass on to their customers in a very competitive marketplace. So I think looking at levels of innovation that allow them to do something different, be it collecting it or treating it, and provide an alternative offtake route for themselves that will keep them commercially viable and sort of provide those benefits to their customers is extremely important. And I think the other bit that's missing, we've seen some of the larger companies starting to collect it, and we were talking about it earlier, but typically a lot of the small companies are very data poor in terms of understanding what materials they have, the composition of those materials, and what they could potentially do with them. So it's really to start having that data now, because they're going to need it in terms of what they're doing, as Emma was saying, with that whole supply chain.
Excellent. And Colin, I've come to you.
Thanks. Sorry.
no, Karen, you go for it.
So the first thing I want to highlight is the fact that the ETS is a mature policy area for a lot of people. In fact, Corinne, you said it started with an EU-wide scheme. Actually, it started with a UK scheme in 2002. The UK was the first large-scale application of emissions trading. The EU ETS started in 2005 and was based largely on the UK model. And of course, we've now got a UK system again post-Brexit. So it's been around for over 20 years. It works in the way that it works. And I think one of the big issues is going to be for the waste and resources sector, it won't be particularly open to special pleading. And obviously there are some aspects of the sector that are unique to that sector, but the authorities are going to be very, 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 very reluctant to make the system different just for energy from waste plants. So there will be an awful lot of EFW operators having to compromise and waste managers having to compromise rather than the system itself. I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. And it's the first time for quite some time that if you like, the resource and waste management sector has had to interface with a regulatory regime that wasn't designed for it and targeted at it. You know, landfill taxes, landfill bans, packaging responsibility, producer responsibility, you know, all of those sorts of things are dealt with officials in government who deal with the sector and are dealt with by the sector. This is new, this is different, and it will be a different kind of a ride. I think that's a really important contextual point that we should all be bearing in mind.
Excellent, thanks, Colin. Okay, so perhaps so what I want to stimulate here is a discussion between the panelists. I think everyone's got a really sort of unique aspect to bring on the subject from different positions. But perhaps we could start with Emma, because I suppose your authority will be getting up to the regulations, and I'm wondering what kind of negotiations you have along the supply chain, because you sit right in the middle of everything, really, don't you? So you've got a really good a good sort of view about how it will affect the supply chain, and also I think the overarching thing here is where the costs are going to lie. So energy from waste firms will have to increase gate fees presumably, but then that's being passed on down the line, and how will that be negotiated? So I don't know if we could sort of talk to that point, but anybody please do come in as well with them to stimulate discussion on that. But if you start with you, Emma.
Sure. I mean, there's still some details to be sorted out, and there's another consultation to get through. But as I understand it, the costs and the charging is likely to be applied at the stack of the energy from waste plant. So there's a known end result of a known amount of carbon being emitted, and then the cost of that is going to flow back through the supply chain and get carved up in various ways. So building on what Samantha said, we started preparing for this about 5 years ago. We started longer than that, looking at what's in the rubbish and what's the carbon content of that waste. So for us, there's things like textiles and e-waste, which are very small in tonnage terms, but when you put a carbon multiplier on, it's huge. And a lot of textiles and e-waste is plastic, and that plastic is largely fossil, and so those things are going to cost us a large amount of money. So, so we've started sort of preparing by thinking, okay, so what do we want government to do with textiles and e-waste? And that's not as relevant, perhaps, to the audience today. But there's a message here about there's some things that government could do to help us all to make this simpler. And if we're all asking for those things, that's actually going to improve things for everybody, because then we'll have a smaller amount of stuff that we're arguing about in terms of the costs. So, things like textiles and plastics, they just shouldn't even be disposed of in the first place. Then plastics, large amount of plastics coming through our waste stream. We don't yet know how to tell the difference in a way that is absolute and, can be stood by rigorously. The difference between fossil plastic and bioplastic, because it all looks like plastic. But there's an issue there. Like, if all of our residents switch to bioplastics, can we prove it? And how do we then not pay these extra charges? Alternatively, if we get all of the plastics out of our residual waste stream and just say, just don't give us plastics in the residual waste, we'll do something with it. There aren't enough plastics recycling facilities for us to take that to. I think we need another 3 million tons worth of plastics recycling facilities. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. We know what the big levers are, but we can't do it by ourselves. Everything that we try to do to resolve this issue requires a lot of supply chain conversations. And that's another reason to start very early, so that by the time you get to 2026 and certainly 2028, you've had a lot of those conversations. So that's on the sort of big macro side,
Mhm,
we run a small transfer station, largely catering to man or woman and van trade operators. And we have different pricing mechanisms in order to encourage separation. But those customers, their key KPI is speed. They want to get in, tip it off, and get out as quickly as possible.
mhm.
Persuading them to do that separating is quite tough, and you need a big differential in price to make it worth their while. But that type of an operation, it's not too difficult to separate. So we've been doing an awful lot more separating than we were in the past. So there's a couple of examples, and there are more. And I think it's I'll let someone else speak. But at some point, it's worth thinking about dust cart operators as well, and
Right.
what's going on inside of those vehicles.
Sure thing. Just a quick thing on that. The report from the ESA, which they did a good report on the ETS scheme, and they estimated the cost to local authorities from this is like to exceed 700 million a year. Is that the kind of the right sort of ballpark figure? I don't know what people think about. I mean, is there a really good estimate about how much this is going to cost and where the cost is going to lie?
It's a trading scheme, so what's correct now might not be the case in a few years' time. And there's a big range. So we're working on about £18 million for our 6 councils, and that's 400,000 tonnes of waste. So £45 a tonne additional cost. And then within that, you've also got the fact that the cost changes every 2 weeks with the trading scheme. And we're estimating that's about a £25 a tonne potential fluctuation. So it could be anywhere from 20 to £70 a tonne. And you don't know.
But Stephen, perhaps I can bring you in that. I mean, I don't know what kind of costings have you come up with?
Yeah, we've been looking at that. We're in that same sort of ballpark. We've focused very much on the industrial and commercial sector and supporting them, and we're in that ballpark of potentially £50 to £80 a tonne, including the risk of that price going up and down based on the carbon trading, and it makes it very difficult for companies to budget. How does the EFW operator budget in terms of taking that into account, and how do they then pass that down onto their customers? And how do those customers then take that into account? So there's a lot of issues to be resolved because of that sort of regular change in the pricing. So that's the sort of areas where we've sort of been seeing and the modelling on. And it means they're going to have to think in a different way. And it's not just, some of those waste streams that Emma was talking about there and separating, say, for example, at the waste transfer station. There are other streams that are, being segregated now, things like washroom waste that contain things like from say service station washrooms, so nappies, sanitary products, etc., that are very difficult then to further segregate. So how do you do something with those? There's a lot of plastic within those materials. So you're going to end up needing to do something perhaps a little bit different and treat them in a different way to create an alternative route for them to go down. Some of the things like AD plants where they depackage their material coming in, what does that create? A very plastic rich material that can't tell what's bioplastic or what's not bioplastic in that, even more so than it coming in normally because it's smeared with organics and things. So again, how do we sort of look at that and what can they do? Because that's then got to be passed back down the supply chain to how can we separate more plastic in things like the food waste so it doesn't come in packaged. So there's these other waste streams that are very hard to handle that sometimes you can't do a lot with, that we need to think about a bit differently. And I think some of those, again, because of what they contain, will have a higher level applied to them because they've got more plastic in. So it could be a higher cost. So that's our sort of thought around it at the moment.
In terms of having a look at carbon prices, so Emma, I assume your £25 to £70 a tonne is based on an estimate of biogenic and fossil content in your waste. If you look at what's called the shadow price of carbon, or the price that DESNZ thinks carbon will be at, and every year I think it updates it and looks forward. Its estimated high is something like between now and 2050 about £145 a tonne, and it's currently £70. And the difference between the £70 that DESNZ is saying and Emma's 45 is because of the composition of the waste. So broadly speaking, you might be looking at a carbon price of up to about £100 a tonne of waste, assuming that the composition stays about the same. So you can get a sense from their estimates what you might be seeing in terms of future carbon prices. But you have that additional uncertainty about composition. And clearly, if you don't manage to get more of the fossil material out, you're more exposed to that fluctuation. So it just drives the point that everyone's already said. The more that you can do as a waste manager or producer to keep the fossil out from the biogenic, the better. Overlay onto this, of course, the fact that there's a ban of biogenic material to landfill coming along, and that makes it even more important to separate the two types of material, because the costs otherwise could be quite bad.
Samantha, could we come to you about that? Because this whole mechanism depends on measurement and regulation and potential penalties. I know you've looked into that. I wonder if you could sort of give a brief outline.
Yeah, certainly. Before I do, I was just going to mention, because Emma picked up on textiles and how that shouldn't be there in the first place. Interestingly, last year, the European Commission voted for EPR on textiles, and that's starting to obviously take its course in Europe. And I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we see more happening in the UK in relation to that. I know that RAP has been looking at it. The EPR for textiles is already up and running in France and seems to be doing very well. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds and develops. And I think that's going to be happening across sort of the different waste streams of trying to bring this all together at the right time. So it's going to be interesting to see how, as I say, that unfolds. But in terms of compliance, yes, I have had a look at it. And I was quite surprised actually to see under the trading scheme the powers that the regulators have. So in England it's the Environment Agency, Scotland obviously SEPA, and in Wales NRW, and they do have quite far-reaching powers in terms of being able to issue information notices. So if they want information from you, they can serve you with a notice. If you're not complying with your permit, they can serve an enforcement notice. They have the power to enter your premises and to carry out inspections, ask to see paperwork. They don't have the power to search. So they can't come in and take it upon themselves to search your premises, but they can come in and inspect, so ask you to produce documents. And within the regulations, there's if you refuse to allow access to premises, there can be a civil penalty of up to £50,000. And I was actually quite surprised to see in terms of the penalties that were being imposed. So if you operate without a permit, then there's a equation that they go into. What is your avoided cost? And that's times by, so it's cost avoided plus the cost of reportable emissions times the carbon price. And that's how they calculate the civil penalty if you're operating without a permit. There's civil penalties of up to 20,000 if you operate in breach of permit. But interestingly, if you provide false or misleading information, the civil penalties are up to £50,000. And in respect of all of those, there's a civil penalty at a daily rate, depending upon what the allegation is. So it's interesting to see. For me, it was interesting to see that the false and misleading information has got a civil penalty up to 50,000, whereas breach of a permit is 20,000. So it just goes to show how important it is to make sure that you understand your data, get it right. Because the consequences can be quite severe if you get it wrong, which goes back to my opening statement of you need to be prepared, and why my understanding is that the Environmental Services Association are doing, if you like, a dry run of reporting and monitoring from 2026 to 2028. I I think that's the time period. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my understanding, is that they're encouraging their members to actually get on and start getting used to reporting and getting used to handling the data. I think that's absolutely an excellent idea and should be embraced by operators.
Sure. One thing I'd like to get a hand on, I suppose, is how what do you do as a waste manager day to day? What do you measure? How do you measure it? And that kind of thing. I know, Stephen, you've been looking at the cement industry, which is one of the most carbon intensive sectors. That's already had to adapt to ETS. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what we think about that, and whether the waste sector can learn from it.
I think there are some parallels, but I think, as we were discussing earlier, that the cement industry has had the ability. They've been under the ETS, and so they've been looking at this and how they innovate and how they change things. And their big change has been a move away where they can from fossil fuels. So we've seen the rise of solid recovered fuels, so the SRFs, solvent fuels, alternative fuels. It could be rubber, etc. That they've been able to then switch away from pure fossil based into these alternatives that have brought down the cost of their emissions to them. But it's still put up the cost of production of cement, and we've seen some of those have to reduce their outputs because the costs are too high, or move to different places and to try and keep those costs down. So it's still having an impact, and they're going into a further phase 4 of the ETS now. So I think those parallels come into how do we measure and look at those materials. So the cement industry is very good now at understanding the quality of the material going into their fuel supply. So they have specifications around what goes into the cement kilns. They look at certain properties within there because they're key for their particular operation and key in terms of the emissions as well. So I think that's one of the big areas that we can really learn from, is in terms of how we can look at develop that data set, and how we can look at it and how we can use it to influence what we might do with those materials. Where can we actually extract even greater value? There may be materials within our waste that we can pull out earlier and get greater value from. There could be ferrous and non-ferrous still with some of the collections, even in that residual. There could be packaging waste that could be used under the PRN. So how do we extract greater value from the materials we've got before it gets there? So I think that's one of those areas that we can learn and work with from the cement industry, is that really understanding the material. And a couple of energy from waste plants that I work with now, they're starting to really look at the quality of their fuel coming in to really get a much greater handle on what's happening, because they can see what's coming down the line. How do they work hand in hand with their fuel producer to actually get a consistent quality fuel that is a good blend of both the biogenic and the fossil? So starting to see some of this now. And I think that's where the parallels come in from the cement industry, and we should really sort of understand those and embrace them where we can.
Sure. Well, perhaps back to you, Emma, on that. Actually, I suppose you're examining what's in the waste. I mean, is it? We're assuming obviously the ETS is there to change habits, isn't it? That's the whole point of it. So is it possible to predict what kind of future feedstock is going to be?
I think only legislation helps us to predict what future feedstock will be. The way to think about this is, how do you, as an independent operator, end up with the best feedstock and not a victim of the worst feedstock? So it used to be heavy bins, and figuring out who had the heavy bins and either increasing their prices or just not picking them as customers. But now we have a slight problem, because light bins are also a problem, because the plastic is so light. So there's a certain amount of needing to look at your sort of customer segmentation. So if you are collecting from children's nurseries, old age people's homes, things like that, that's the hygiene products waste that Stephen talked about. So do we want government to say all nappies and hygiene products have to be bioplastics just to make it easy? Or do we want to start building specialist recycling facilities for that type of waste, which is, expensive because it's a health hazard. And then on the other side of it, your sort of corner shop type, they've got absolute mixed waste. I think it would be useful to start thinking that the day of the single bin is gone. So you've got your clues in simpler recycling, which does apply to trade waste as well as household, requires separation. There's ways in there's appropriate exemptions for not separating anything. A corner shop, one big wheelie bin once a fortnight, they haven't got space for multiple bins, so they may be allowed some exemptions. But then how do you sell it? And if you are currently selling a single waste bin, that's the first thing I'd be focusing on. No more single waste bins. So either get the food waste out, get all of the non-landfill stuff out, and then you've got your plastics and your fossil waste that you don't want to go to EFW, or get your food waste out, get your plastics out, and then whatever isn't recycled, isn't recyclable, goes to EFW. There's loads of ways to carve it up, but actually making that change for no more single waste bins will be very important.
Sure thing. The question has come through from one of the attendees here, which I think is anonymous, it says, but the question is, how long roughly could one expect a permit variation to take? I'm not quite sure which type of permit they're talking about here, but I want to sort of link that in with what you were saying, Stephen, about and actually we're talking about Emma as well, sort of increased separation, producing a different product, and then handing on. So I'm assuming that will need to another part of the regulatory system, which is another cost to a business, I guess.
Yeah, we're seeing, because we're working with a lot of smaller waste operators, even for relatively minor changes, if it's a bespoke permit, is looking at 18 months in terms of having a permit duly made, gone through the process, and then issued that you can implement. So that's the sort of time frame you're talking about. And if it's even more complex or involves innovation that the agency haven't come across with, say, a new type of technology, for example, that somebody wants to put in, you can take a lot longer. And obviously it's, the agency are under-resourced. It's about having to work with them and try and sort of help educate them at the same time. But it's a process that isn't going to get dramatically shorter overnight. So it's that sort of length, 18 months plus.
Sure. Samantha, is that in your experience? Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, 18 months plus. So if you're lucky.
And what sort of costs are involved in just like the sheer, just going through the bureaucracy of all?
For example, some of the minor changes to a area permit, you're talking sort of, say, £14,000 for the permit application, plus then any additional costs that you may need to put in place for updating information like a fire prevention plan, odour management plan, all of those other documents that come with it to ensure that you're protecting the environment. If you've got to update them, there's obviously a potential cost if you need external support for that.
Perhaps Colin, could we come back to you? So this is what we're hearing here is a sector that will need to change. Do you see it going in the right way? That obviously this is here to change our habits and reduce carbon. Do you think it'll be successful? I mean, is it working in the way it should do for the waste sector?
Well, the approach of using an emissions trading scheme works. There's loads of evidence. As I say before, it's the scheme itself has been around for 20 years, so it definitely works. And there's been a lot of learning about how to structure it to make it work better. I think that there are aspects of the resource waste sector that are different, and therefore you might not have exactly the same impact that you might model, if you like, if you didn't understand the sector. We've all talked about that a lot over the last few years, the differences of the sector. I think it's also the case that there are some other measures around it, and we've all kind of referred to this. So, for example, there's a ban on biogenic waste going to landfill that's coming along across the UK in different timescales. Personally, I would be gobsmacked if the government didn't increase landfill tax for the stuff that can go to landfill to a level that continues to make energy from waste, even with a carbon price, more attractive than landfill, or at least balance them. So, there's that. Then there's the impact of things like EPR, simpler recycling, and so on and so forth on the waste composition. So there are many more things, pressures playing on the sector than just the ETS. And it's really hard to be categorical about how the ETS will impact alongside all of those other pressures. But fundamentally, setting a price on things has been shown time and time again to be a really good way of getting people to find imaginative ways to reduce their liability and their exposure. So yes, I think it will. Whether it would be as effective as hoped or more effective than thought kind of depends on how some of these other pressures play.
Okay. Well, the interesting is about imagination there. I suppose that's again, that's the reason why we wanted this webinar to go ahead and try and sort of stimulate that, I suppose, to what ways to do it.
Lauren, can I just come in on that?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that's different for us in the public sector to trade waste is EPR for packaging. So we have the ability to have some of our costs paid for plastic waste going through energy from waste if the design of packaging doesn't change in order to reduce those costs. But as I understand it, the trade waste hasn't been included yet. It's sort of sitting on the back burner. And so I'm not sure if traders and the customers at the end of the trade waste system are going to have that same that ability to put pressure on to change packaging other than through their own purchasing power, which then comes back to Stephen's point. If you're little, it's going to be really, really hard to do that. So why does that matter? I mean, I know it's not the same up and down the UK, but where we are in West London, about half the waste is trade waste. So it's pretty substantial.
And that's sort of, the level that we're working with is working with the smaller operators, that gives them an alternative by doing something different with their waste. It allows them to put it through treatment systems and take it away from some of these traditional offtakes into alternatives. So it gives them an opportunity to do something different. Some of that is to enable recovery of plastic materials and use them in a different way. Some of it is to create fuels that can, say, go into the cement industry. But it's helping them give that ability. If they can't influence it at the front end, can they do something with it post-treatment, because they've done something there to make it able to be separated and take some of that value from it? So it's, as Emma's saying, if you can't push it at that front end because of their size, can we do something with them post-treatment to help separate those materials and get that value for them until it changes at the front end?
I've got a question here from an anonymous attendee. I think this must be for you, Stephen. So will cement kilns operating on solid recovered fuel sit outside an ETS?
No, they're already within ETS. That they already get charged for putting emissions into the atmosphere. But it means that by switching from pure fossil-based materials to alternative fuels, that charge is less, because you've got elements of the biogenic fractions in there as well. So no, they're fully captured within that.
Sure. Thanks for that. Okay. We have another question here from another anonymous. So with the flexible plastics and films collections to be introduced by local authorities in 2027, this should drive down fossil content of residual bins. So will there be a waste composition analysis required by each RDF, SRF producer sending to energy from waste operators? And that's, well, to you all, I guess. Is there any handle on that?
I think there's a really big question about how the calculation of the fossil proportion of the carbon dioxide emitted is going to be done. And there are different models that you can take. Waste composition is one. You could just do stack monitoring. There are technologies that would enable you to differentiate more or less between fossil and non-fossil carbon, but they're not trivial to put in place. The agencies may end up deciding to have a deemed approach. So they say that going into an energy from waste facility say 60% of what goes in by tonnage is plastic, and this is your conversion factor, and therefore, unless you can prove to me differently, this is what you have to pay. There are different models that you could go for. The purism of the ETS would suggest they'd rather go for the stack monitoring. And at that point, in terms of the charge you're paying, it doesn't matter what the composition is. But the composition becomes really interesting if you're trying to then pass the cost back in some kind of proportionate manner to your suppliers. So if truckload A is 90% plastic and truckload B is 90% biogenic, are you going to charge them both the same, or are you going to try and differentiate? So that, I think, will become commercially interesting for energy from waste producers to know who's providing which bit.
And
Yeah.
we were speaking before, we were saying that the sector is relatively data poor.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's in our interests as waste producers, you know, wherever you are in the chain, you're one of the waste producers until you get to the energy from waste plant in this scenario. And I think it's in our interests to know what the composition of our waste is. And we're quite lucky because it doesn't change that much until something changes. But with, you know, that's the reason why we've been looking at waste comp, because everything's changing all at once. So, you know, get onto that as soon as you can before all the changes happen, and then you'll see where you were as a baseline, where you are with some of the changes in the DEFRA legislation, and then what the impact is at the end. And that will give you much better negotiating power on, you know, what you pay.
The other thing, I suppose, we were speaking about this before, is the experience from perhaps Germany. I know, Stephen, you looked in that as well, and maybe you as well, Colin. The ETS has been running there and applied to the waste sector, as far as I know. And is there anything we can learn from what's been going on over there?
I mean, Stephen's been trying to find out a bit more about the German. In general, energy from waste will be entering the EU ETS by 2030, I think, is the deadline. But that's all I know about it. But Stephen might know a bit more about the German model.
We know that they're putting in place sort of arbitrary carbon tax now to sort of help bringing that in. So it's a new tax that's been coming in. So it's really getting the data to understand how that's influencing now some of the changes that perhaps will happen for householders, for commercial businesses, and what they might start to do, because that, rather than wait and then the price goes up, they're starting to think about it and put in place something that's going to be an intermediate tax on going in. So that's going to have a behavioural change. So it's really looking to understand over the course of this year what change that might entail, what sort of the companies are thinking about that, and how they're thinking about responding to it to take that into account. So it's one to sort of keep an eye on over this year, and whether other countries look to do the same ahead of the ETS encompassing energy from waste as well.
Perhaps come back to you, Samantha, because I wanted to know. So you talked about the regulators a bit earlier on. Do you expect? I mean, also I think we spoke the problem of waste tourism. As soon as there's any kind of like difference in regulation between one administration and another, then you tend to get people operators, more bad operators, I suppose, trying to sort of wriggle around the rules. Is that something that has been a problem? Do you foresee it as a problem? Is there any differences in regulations?
Well, I mean, because it's not yet up and running, we haven't seen, what's happening. I mean, with any legislation, there's always those that try and find a loophole and try and exploit it. I was digging back into the depth of my memory, actually, and I remembered that I had done a carbon credit fraud back in 2014, where somebody had traded basically on the ETS, the EU ETS scheme over 69 days, and had made themselves, through reclaiming VAT in this country, had made themselves a tidy sum of £39 million. That ended up being a 4-month fraud trial at Southwark Crown Court. My client was acquitted because obviously she was innocent, but the other defendants were all found guilty. And so there's all, in any regulation, there's always people who are looking for loopholes and cutting corners and trying to make profit. And I think that obviously that's one of the things that the government are going to have to be quite careful with in terms of making sure. And I think there are already measures being put in place in terms of waste going from one country to the other to make sure that there isn't this leakage into other countries and palming off waste to other countries. Of course, the other thing that we have to remember is that there is, within the waste regulations of 2011, there's a requirement to adhere to the waste hierarchy. And so there's a duty upon operators to have regard to the waste hierarchy and try, prevention, obviously, before recycling, before reuse, and then landfill being the least favourable option. I think that's the other thing that there's going to have to be sort of monitoring of, to make sure that this doesn't result in waste being pushed down the waste hierarchy and being landfilled. Rather, it needs to be pushed up and having prevention, which is where the sort of textiles EPR and things like that will assist in terms of prevention in the first place, rather than it going down to landfill. But Colin's already picked up on the fact that it's likely to result in landfill tax being looked at and balanced to make sure that it's not economically more profitable to send stuff to landfill rather than to EFW. So I think there's a lot of unknowns at the moment, and time will tell how it unfolds. But I think that operators should be thinking about going up the waste hierarchy, not solutions going down, because as time goes on, the legislation is only going to get tighter in relation to things going down the waste hierarchy. So I think, again, it goes back to planning ahead and seeing the bigger picture rather than immediate solutions.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I mean, I definitely concur with your point on the importance of going up the waste hierarchy. The other thing is that the example of how the EU is tightening up on textiles, I think there might even be a cross-border tax, which could result in, because they're going first, we might find ourselves with lots of textiles that are very low quality, and therefore called recycling but destined for disposal. And so those charges will come through our system if we allow that to happen. The other area to look at and think about is MRF rejects, material recycling facility rejects. That's an area where, if you trade on gate fees rather than knowing the full detail of the value, and again, it comes back to waste comp, if you know what you're putting into the MRF and the value of those materials, then you're in a different place than if you just send your recycling and take a gate fee, because a substantial chunk of your costs will be those rejects. And if they're going to energy from waste, then there's likely to be a fair bit of plastic. So I would hope that what we'll see, but there's a risk that the opposite will happen. I hope that we'll see fewer plastics rejects going abroad, where they are unfortunately being burnt, and see them, dealt with properly through recycling facilities. Well, that could be abroad or here. I'm not sort of making a point about where, but just, not burning plastics is the thing that we have to get to. And that's, I think, the sort of the compliance and regulatory areas, Samantha, that we'll start to see a little bit. So, if we need 3 million tonnes worth of plastics recycling facilities, how quickly are we going to get those up and running, and who's going to build them? And how do we get that EPR funding for trade plastics through the system to help us build them?
And just coming on from what both Emma and Sam have said as well, in that, if we're pushing it down the supply chain in terms of you need to sort of have that change of behaviour, so encourage it right at the very start, that requires education. And one of the things that's been cut, for example, for local authorities is education budgets in terms of working with householders on what should be done at the curbside. So how do you communicate that out to them? And even more so, how do you get communicate that out to industrial and commercial customers? How do we change that behaviour? Because you can change legislation quite quickly, but behavioural changes take a long time. So you've still got that period where you're not going to get things right. Things are going to happen. And I think, perfect example, if you're out with the family say, at a shopping centre or shopping mall at the weekend, and you go to a fast food outlet, or the shop, the food court, what do? More often than not, you're in a rush, you get your stuff and it goes straight in the bin. Do you spend time segregating it and putting it into the right containers and trying to do the right thing, or to go, no, I've got to go, and it all just goes into that one bin? So it's that behavior we need to really focus on as well. So it's not just a driven by the legislation, it's that behavioral change that makes us want to do it, and we do it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say, you've never been out for lunch with Anna Willits, because if you go out for lunch with her,
I know.
she'll have you putting it all in the right bin.
I'm sure she would. Like, quite right too. Yeah. A question has come through, and I'm very pleased because it's something I wanted to touch on anyway. So this is for the panel in general. How do you see carbon capture for energy from waste changing things? Anybody?
I think it's an interesting potential. So I have to say that I'm a skeptic about how much carbon capture, use and storage is going to be able to be put in place for energy from waste. I think there are lots of reasons why quite a few sites will struggle to do that. I fear it's going to be a bit like district heating from energy from waste plants. Great intent, but not really getting delivered very much. However, if you can have a CCUS facility on an energy from waste plant that's part of the ETS, and the heck of acronyms in there, and you can put a significant proportion of biogenic content into there, you are effectively removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And indeed, some of the modelling from government suggests that removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is a key part of our meeting net zero by 2050 approach. So energy from waste with carbon capture and storage could well be an element of that. And the ETS is potentially a tool you could use to pay for it, because you're not going to do it unless you get, much harder to do it unless you're going to get paid for it somehow. And you can see the way that you might get given credits, if you like, for taking some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So it's a potential upside, but there are lots of ifs, buts and maybes around it.
There's a big aspect there that Colin's talked about, which is the U word, the use. Most of it is really carbon capture and storage. We really need to encourage the development of the use of that carbon. It's a resource that we can make use of. So how do we do that? How do we create the innovation to enable that to happen as well on a larger scale, and not just think about storing it? So I think that's the next stage that comes with that.
In cost terms, I think it's cheaper to do the work up front than to pay for the storage at the back end. Bit
like if you're ill, if you can treat the symptoms before having to have something more serious at the hospital, for example, where treatment can be more expensive, it's that thing. Do it up front. Prevention is better than the cure.
Yeah, don't even get ill in the first place.
Yeah.
And then you avoid the regulators too. That's the other thing.
Yes, that's the.
You get it right to start with, you can avoid
the disgusting medicine you have to take.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's sort of a related question here coming in, and another anonymous attendee. So they say the waste composition will significantly change going to energy from waste plants, with all plastics possibly being recycled. Well, again, yeah, it depends on our capacity on that, isn't it? Has anyone made an assessment on the impact on the calorific value of waste streams to the efficiency of energy from waste operations? I'm pretty sure they have. In addition, the carbon tax is only on the non-biogenic carbon number. The measurement and assessment is costly, with carbon 14 assessment, plus the analysis is not quick. I'm not sure I entirely understand that, but I hope somebody on the panel does.
Some of that's a little bit too technical for me, so I'm going to talk really broad brush about it. But we find that getting the food waste out of the energy from waste and getting the plastic waste out of the energy from waste leaves us in not a very different situation than we were when it was all going through. So there's been, we don't anticipate big swings in the CV of our waste unless we're unsuccessful at getting all of the food waste out. At the moment, we're getting about 30% of it.
Sure. Colin, you must be one of the country's foremost energy from waste experts. Have you got a...
So everyone will do that analysis for themselves, and it depends on their streams and everything else. what I do know is that some energy from waste operators have found their CVs being too high because of the growth of plastic. And for those of you who think, well, what does that matter? Actually, an energy from waste plant is designed to operate in a certain calorific value range. Too low and you don't get enough heat, too much and you can burn out the boiler and you can make other damages to the equipment. So some energy from waste operators are actually pre-mixing to reduce their CVs. Now, if they are gonna lose a substantial amount of plastic, that might actually make it easier in the interim. But yeah, I mean, if you only take two messages away from this whole webinar, the first one is be prepared, and the second is know what your waste is. And I can't stress enough how important those two are, and everybody else on this call has been saying the same thing. And if you do that, then you can manage these sorts of differences. Do you want a science lesson on carbon 14?
Perhaps again, can I get you to write an article for us? Perhaps we could spread it around. So that's something I should sit down and read with, in my hands, I think. But I actually would. I mean, I'm fascinated with that kind of stuff. But we've had quite a lot of questions coming in, so I think I'm going to sort of go to the question and answer session a bit earlier than I was going to, if that's all right with everybody, because I think there's an awful lot of questions coming. Here's one for, I think, probably to you, Stephen. So it's coming. If we pre-process waste to increase biogenic content, how will we be able to prove that content to reduce ETS exposure?
That comes down, as Colin's just reiterated, understanding your waste stream. And as Emma has said, and Sam, we need to have that data. You need to measure your waste. You need to understand that composition so you can determine what is your biogenic and non-biogenic fraction. And there are a number of UCAS accredited laboratories that you can use. They have a number of tests that they can do to sort of determine what is biogenic and what isn't, and that will give you the composition of that particular waste. Obviously, it's a snapshot at that time, and waste will vary. The next scoop you take will have a slightly different composition because it's not consistent. But over time, you then get a picture of a trend, and you can sort of see what your level of biogenic and non-biogenic is. But it needs to be continuous. You need to be doing it on a regular basis to build up those trends so you really understand it. And that's the only way to do it, is to sample and test and look at the analysis of what your material contains. It's that characterization, and you need to do it properly.
Well, I suppose, do you have a handle on, I suppose, how this is for independent waste operators, how effective their current sort of measuring regimes are, and what can be done to improve them, and the cost involved as well.
Pretty poor is the general. They don't do it unless they have to. So why would they have that expenditure? And it's not cheap. You can for a full characterization, you can be breaking it down into different fractions. You're talking a few £1,000 because you've got to hand sort it and take out all those parts. If you're looking at then going, actually, I just want to understand some key components. So calorific value, moisture content, your biogenic fraction, and say just what's the fossil fraction, then you're talking a few £100. So and you have to do it properly to make sure you're demonstrating it's been done in a way that is repeatable. It's going to create a consistent data set that you can rely upon to give you that data going forward. So it's not cheap, and it's something that needs to be thought about and needs to be implemented properly.
And I presume, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, there's proving, and there's commercial relationships, and there's salespeople and operators all the way along the chain who they know that, the guys driving the dust cart know what people are putting in their bins. They see it. The guys on the transfer stations, they can see the changes in what's coming through. And what I experience is, I was sort of looking at the data, and I'm in my ivory tower, and I go and I talk to them and I say, this has gone up. And they go, yeah, I could have told you that. Right. Well, in future, I'd like you to tell me that. So it doesn't all have to be provable. It can also be using the skills of all the individuals that we've got.
Sure. And I suppose, Stephen, when you talk about the cost there, I would imagine that if I was a business owner, I'd only spend money on examining the content of my waste if I knew that I would save money in the long run through ETS. So that there's a crucial point, isn't it? It's going to
you either do it you either do it because you're mandated to do it, you have to do it for a compliance reason, or it's going to save you money. And so it's looking at where's that pressure point.
Sure. Okay, so well, that really a very gratifying number of questions. So to attendees out there watching this, we'll try and get to as many questions as we can before 12 o'clock when this ends. But we will keep track of all of these, and we'll try and answer everything as much as we can. But we'll have to do it after the session via email, if that's all right. And also, this will be written up in MRW as well, so we'll be able to read through the issues that come through. But there's a question here which I'm very glad came up, because it's something that I wanted to ask as well, which is that presumably both carbon capture on energy from waste plants and yes, I suppose we're on carbon capture. What about sort of technologies such as pyrolysis, gasification? I know that they've struggled to really get going at scale, haven't they? In this country, but I mean, will we finally see sort of pyrolysis bloom as a advanced conversion treatments, all that kind of stuff?
Some of this comes as a technology. Both gasification and pyrolysis work. They do work. It's about what you put into them, and I think where we've struggled is that we've put not the right quality of fuel into them. It's been quite inconsistent. I've been involved in disputes that have involved feedstocks going into gasification and pyrolysis plants, and why they haven't worked. And I think some of it is we have an expectation that's too high. We think it's going to achieve this level of availability or operational performance when it won't on the feedstocks going in, or we put a feedstock in that isn't really comparable to what they need. So perhaps some of what we might do now with the encouragement for this is to produce feedstocks that are much better for these processes, that then allow things like sustainable aviation fuel, perhaps that's a bit of an oxymoron, to be produced, or chemical recycling to be undertaken by breaking down those plastics. But it all comes down to, again, understanding what you're putting in, having the right feedstock to go into that process. And that doesn't matter whether it's a plastic recycling process or some other form of recycling process. You need to have the right material going in. So it's all about feeding those plants with the right material, and that comes down to understanding what you've got and what you can do with it.
Yeah, it's an important debate on the chemical recycling, particularly for plastics. We've been having it for a very long time. I think we need to really crunch through it and get to a decision quite quickly.
Indeed. Colin, I mean, do you know if it's been sort of examined, the ETS on pyrolysis and different types of energy from waste, I suppose? Is there been analysis on that?
So my working assumption is they'll be covered. So if you look at some of the pyrolysis plants for example, in Scotland, which I know rather better than others, they are, to all intents and purposes, energy from waste plants and would be captured by the ETS because they burn the gases in situ. If they were not creating direct emissions, then maybe they would be exempt from it, but most of them will create direct emissions. So in the ETS, there's a de minimis. If you produce less than 2,500 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent a year, you don't have to participate in the ETS if you don't want to. Maybe a pyrolysis plant would be underneath that if it was not burning the gases and just using them for some sort of chemical processing.
That's perhaps where you're seeing the likes of, sorry, Colin, the likes of Quantafuel come into the market, which Viridor have acquired, where they're looking at having that type of thermal treatment at the front to then produce heavy and light oils. So you're looking at what can we do to get that added value out of them. Yeah,
and then if those are then combusted somewhere else, that's where the ETS will catch them.
Yeah.
Excellent. Here's another question. I think it's a rather good question, and this is again for anybody who knows the answer. Where does the revenue raised by ETS carbon allowances go, and does the panel think some of it should be reinvested to drive behaviour change to reduce fossil fuel content in residual waste?
HMG.
Treasury. And definitely think that some of it should be used. Stephen said, don't underestimate the communications and behaviour change aspect of this. 60 million people plus, changing their approach and attitude, and just a different level of understanding. It's really important that we do put national and local campaigns together, and just to help people to understand why it's important and what they can do to shift the dial a little bit.
But do I detect a bit of cynicism about money going in from the sector and not coming back to it?
No, we're not budgeting for any to come back.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole way the ETS works is government auctions off allowances. Everybody who needs allowances either buys them during that auction or then has to buy them when they're traded. So the original auction price goes to government. But if you then trade them on the open market, you can make a profit or a loss in the same way as you can with any other market. So that's where the money goes round. It used to be the case that certain industries would get free allowances to recognise the problems that they face. I can't see any appetite for doing that for energy from waste.
There are also going to be subsistence fees for holding a permit, as there would be for any waste operation. And I'm assuming that the same will apply, that those subsistence fees will be used for regulatory actions of the regulator in relation to those holding permits, as opposed to those operating unlawfully outside the scheme. And so it will go back into regulation of the legitimate sector.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, because the EA is often complaining about not having enough resources to do what it's on its plate already, and here's a new thing to regulate. So I assume that the funding arrangements, specialisms for EA officers must be considered, I suppose.
Yeah, there's 3 different levels of subsistence fees depending upon the amount of emissions. And I can't remember now what, I think it ranges up to something like up to £5,000, I think it is.
Right.
4,900 or something like that, the subsistence fees that I was looking at. So the charging scheme for 2023, obviously each year it gets it might change by the time this is up and running, but the current scheme, it's about 5,000, I think is the top figure for subsistence fees.
Right.
And it's one of the interesting questions will be, so the Environment Agency is the in England is the enforcing body for waste permits and for the emissions trading scheme, but it's different teams who have the sort of day-to-day lead on that, and it's going to be interesting to know how the agency, just on a practical basis, how the agency is going to manage that coherence, whether the people that are going to come in to inspect your EFW plant is the same people that come in to inspect it for air quality emissions and everything else, or whether it's going to be the specialist ETS folk, or what, how that's going to work, and that might mean that the day-to-day experience, certainly at the beginning of the scheme, might be a little bit rockier for some of our EFW operators than would be ideal.
Sure.
Again, it depends on how the agency is, because of course it's different agencies in different parts of the country.
Yes, of course, Wales and Scotland might have a different system entirely, I suppose.
You'd hope that you'd have, I was going to say, it would be hoped that you'd have people coming in who were actually properly trained to understand what they were doing, because that's something I see time and time again in my practice, is officers who conduct visits who don't actually understand the business and don't know what they're doing. So let's be optimistic and think that they are going to be properly trained to conduct such visits.
I think it's an interesting question. Is it easier to train somebody who understands an EFW plant to understand the ETS issues, or is it easier to train somebody who understands the ETS issues to understand an EFW plant? I'm glad I'm not a manager in the Environment Agency.
Perhaps a related question, I suppose we're talking about regulation here, but I know we touched on it earlier, but how does the panel foresee waste crime evolving post-ETS and the waste reforms?
I think one of the attractions to the regulator of including EFW is it's always easier to regulate a stationary large source. And in the final analysis, you know where every chimney is from an energy from waste facility. So that, I think, is not going to be an issue. And again, if we end up with stack monitoring, there's all sorts of nifty ways to make sure that works properly and to penalise people if you think they're not doing the right job, etc., etc. So actually, I don't think that this in and of itself is likely to have a huge impact on deliberate waste crime. I mean, it will have an impact, as Sam will well know, on people getting it wrong by mistake. But in terms of actual deliberate waste crime. This alone, I don't think will. I think what will be interesting to see is, we've already mentioned what ends up happening to landfill tax, what's around the biodiversity, biogenic landfill ban. Those sorts of issues, I think, will play into the waste crime agenda, because there are things that you can do to circumvent that deliberately and criminally.
I think what's interesting though, Colin, is that you know, if, for example, you don't comply with enforcement notice, or if you're in breach of your permit, they don't need to go through the process of a criminal trial. And that can often be a deterrent for regulators, because of the cost involved, the time it takes to actually do something. Whereas here, you've got a civil penalty. And so they have to do an investigation. They decide that you actually deserve a civil penalty. They'll notify you that you are going to get it. You can make representations. They can reject them, and you've got your 45 grand civil penalty. So it's a much quicker process. I think there can be tighter control, because they don't have to go through the whole criminal process. It's a much quicker fix if people are in breach of things. I mean, there is a right of appeal, so don't panic. There is a right of appeal, but that goes to the first tier tribunal rather than the planning inspectorate. So, but it's set up differently to normal permitting regime.
I think that when big systems change, you tend to see a spike in the criminal statistics, either because people have made mistakes and not been forewarned or forearmed and got caught, or you know, similarly, they've priced things wrong because they weren't aware of what was coming, and then the charges have hit them. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, and particularly the transfer stations, to start communicating now what's changing, how pricing will change, getting people ready so that they are having those conversations as well. And then I think the other thing is just the reasons why. I think it's really important that we're talking about the reasons why, the importance of not burning fossil plastics or fossil waste, and the impact that has on all of us. So there's a collective uplift in information, because the other side of it, of course, is the ordinary householder who books somebody to come and get rid of things on top of their council collections. They're going to go for the cheapest. And in going for the cheapest, they're going for the one sometimes who's breaking the law. And so, you know, if you're one of those operators that's being undercut by the lawbreakers, then make sure that's up front in your offer, that, you know, if people are coming in cheap on this, it's because they're going to fly tip it, or it's because they're avoiding, and the importance of carbon and the environment, because people really, you know, the data is there now. People really do care about the environment far more than, you know, 20 years ago it was number 10 on everyone's top 10 list of important issues, and now it's firmly number 4, and it hasn't budged, and I think it'll only go up.
Thanks. And we've got a few comments in on deposit return scheme. And here's a particular question, I think, perhaps Stephen, to you. If deposit return scheme and the Welsh waste regs are implemented, then the composition of waste will significantly change in the next 24 months. Does the panel think this will reduce the £45 plus per tonne of waste carbon cost?
Depends what it takes out and then what's left in, because you can take some out through the DRS, but there may be others that is still in there. So it all depends on what's left in, and then, you know, how much of that is the fossil base. So it may not bring it down, because it's based on that waste that's going to be going into the FW, and it depends how it's counted.
Yeah, if you have the comprehensive recycling systems, DRS takes from that, not from the rubbish.
Sure. But is DRS, Stephen, in your analysis of ETS, was DRS like a something you looked at, or something you just feel is actually not really going to make that much of an impact?
But from our perspective, we haven't, because of the type of customer that we're working with, and we tend to work with the residual waste fraction and hard to treat waste streams rather than say the recycling streams and looking at the impact there. So we tend to deal with that bit. So we haven't done a lot on there because we've not seen a big impact in terms of the particular waste streams that we're looking at.
Oh, okay. Here's another one. How will ETS impact RDF export? I think that's a good question.
I think.
Sorry, Colin, you go first.
No, I was just going to say, I think that there's going to be interest in taxing at some level that activity to avoid leakage, basically. It's slightly complicated because technically it's an import of a service waste disposal rather than export of a material. So how you tax it is slightly different, but that's bound to happen. I think in the short term. The other thing to bear in mind, well, two other things that are worth bearing in mind. Firstly, you can do a thing called linking between emissions trading schemes, and if you link to emissions trading schemes, then you can share allowances between them. And a really good example of this is the Swiss emissions trading scheme is linked to the European emissions trading scheme. Post-election, it may be that we have a government that's more open to those kinds of conversations. There's an awful lot of good reasons why we want to link the UK ETS with the EU ETS. And if we did that, and EFW is in the EU ETS from 2030, then you're not going to get the carbon benefit of exporting RDF to a European facility because it's still going to get hit by that carbon tax issue. So it's probably a short-term problem between 2028 and linking, whenever that would happen. The other thing is that a big driver for linking the EU ETS and the UK ETS is going to be the introduction by the European Union of carbon border adjustment mechanisms, or CBAMs. And this is the idea that if you're importing stuff that's got lots of embedded carbon in it, you put a big tax on it. And the UK is being driven to create its own CBAM regime, but if the ETSs were linked, then it would simplify that as well. And that's a big potential cost for people. So I think linking is highly likely to be on the agenda for a future government. And that would help remove the RDF export problem. But there is that interim period where it could be an issue.
And on that as well, I suppose, so solid recovered fuel, that's going to have a do you see that as having there'll be a push towards that as sort of higher quality product, basically, rather than RDF? Is that?
I think it depends on the end use. So if we get a lot more of the, let's say, the chemical recycling plants being delivered, then ultimately you want a better quality fuel to cause less problems through that process. So I think in some aspects it will push the quality of the fuel to a higher level rather than it just being the base material. But I think even for energy from waste plants, you're going to get, this is what people will look at, can they put the right type of fuel into there that helps prevent the carbon emissions? So you're going to get different blends of fuels. But I think it will push, as we want more recycling infrastructure, be it chemical recycling, hydrogen production, etc. I think it will push towards a higher quality fuel that suits those processes better.
Thanks. There's another question. Okay, so maybe one or two more questions, and I'll sort of get to our wrapping up statements, I think. But as I said, we had so many questions in. It's really gratifying to see. We'll try and get around to them all as much as we can after this session. But there's somebody mentioned here about a mention of training. I thought it was quite a good point here. Because what we're talking about is a lot of unknowns and a lot of people who will have to suddenly learn quite a lot in a short space of time. So are the panel aware of any good training courses relating to better understanding the processes behind incineration of waste in order to aid changes to minimise ETS implications? I think that's rather a good point. I'm not aware of it, but if anybody else can enlighten me, that'd be great.
I'm sure that CIWM will provide some education as time moves forward, and I know that ESA is obviously very much guiding their members in terms of being prepared for it. So I wonder whether one or other of those will be putting out more papers or webinars on the subject.
You'd hope that somebody like CIWM will, because it covers that broad range of the sector in terms of, be it small operators, large operators, non-core, could be dealing with, you know, specialist waste streams, etc. So it provides that sort of coverage for all. So that would be an important place for it to sort of come from.
Yes, I think you're right. I think, you know, yeah, as you know, our point is webinars to get out to the smaller waste firms that might not be a member of the ESA, for instance. I think, okay, so we're getting to the final 10 minutes. So I wanted to thank you all so much. I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. I've learned an awful lot, and I'm sure we can actually go on for the rest of the day. But I wanted to just have to really sort of wrap things up in the same way that we started. It's a question to each panelist. And just to ask each one of you, what has struck you as the most important issues we've covered today? And what do you think the industry will need to really get to grips with ahead of 2028? Stephen, since you're on the screen, perhaps we start with you.
I think it's like crossing a very busy road. You've got that traffic coming. If you cross it with your eyes closed, you're more likely to get hit and run over than if you cross it with your eyes open and are prepared and looking around to see what's going on. I think for the small operators, it's getting your head up now, look around at what's going on, look at what you might need to do, because it's going to be timely in terms of getting things into the system, understand the impact and start looking at different ways of what you can do now to mitigate that impact further down the line.
Brilliant, thanks. Colin, to you, same question.
So there are some of the details about how the system's going to work for the waste industry that still need to be worked out, and there are some questions about how various other regimes timing-wise will work together. But I think that an absolute no regrets action now is understand your waste. Make sure you understand what it is that you're bringing in or taking out. Because if you don't understand that, then you are going to be at massive disadvantage when ETS comes along and a number of other changes. So that's my main take home, I think, for people. It's a big change, and there are going to be impacts on everyone. And if you understand your waste, you will be in a better position to react.
That's going to be a strong message from today. Emma, I suppose that you could concur with that?
Absolutely would. I think my take-home message, in addition to that, is training is only half of what's needed. I would really strongly advocate get in the room with several members of your supply chains and look at the process and examine the process and do it together. Don't do it individually, because everybody's got to be able and willing to shift at a similar time in order to create that new process and the systemic change.
How's best to do that? I mean, this is something obviously you've been doing yourself. I mean, is there any sort of advice you can give on how the best way to get? So, I mean, it may be. I mean, everyone's got their heads down in their own little thing, aren't they? Usually, so I mean, it must be quite a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it is difficult, but hopefully everyone's sort of heard the consequences of not doing it, so therefore it's worthwhile. We did a process. It's a different topic, but we did something on food waste several years ago with one of our boroughs, and there were about 12 people in the room representing all the different parts of the supply chain. And we mapped a process over 3 half days, and we changed the system. It looks like we've lost Corin.
I think you've put him into shock. It was the 3 days. That's all it took.
You have to be pretty focused.
Hi all, Ollie here. Let me just go double check what happened to Corin. If we could all hang on for just a moment. Thank you.
Sam, why don't you give us your closing thoughts whilst we're waiting
Well,
for him?
my closing thoughts, I think, are probably, there was a judge in a case. He said to an advocate, I hasten to add it wasn't me, remember the 5 Ps. And it's always stuck with me when I read the case, the law report, which was proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. And I just think that that if a judge can say it in court, then I can get away with saying it on this webinar. So that's what I would say, is just make sure that you're properly prepared, and take advice when necessary. If there's training, take it. And I guess also you said, I think, Stephen, look up, keep your head up. And I think it's also to make sure you're not blinkered. Don't focus solely upon the ETS, because there's other things that are coming down the track at the same time, and you need to make sure that you don't fall foul of other legislation. And so it's basically having 360 vision, that you know that you've got, you know, potentially EPR, DRS, digital waste tracking, and sort of everything, the ban on biodegradable to landfill, all those different things all need to be, you need to look at all those things at once to make sure that doing something in one area doesn't make you fall foul in another area. So back to the proper preparation.
I'm so sorry I dropped out there. I was so near the end of the session and suddenly I had a big crash. So I'm now using my colleague's my colleague's computer. So apologies for that. But it sounded like you didn't need me at all. You're getting on perfectly fine. But you know, a bit of dramatic end for me there. So there's any, are there any sort of final thoughts, any issues that weren't really teased out during this morning that you feel there ought to be?
Just one final one on all of those closing statements. It sounds like an awful lot, and that sort of lift your head up, and you know, you're looking at potentially tsunami. That can be quite worrying. Key metrics. There's a few key metrics that will get you through all of this. So work out what those are, and then you can keep it quite simple.
Excellent. Okay, great to end on like a more positive note there. That's fantastic. Well, once again, thank you to everybody. It's been, as I said, it's been a real learning session for me as well. And I'm sure it's something that subject we'll come back to. And as I say, all people have been answering lots of questions. We will try and get back to you on that, and try and circulate around the speakers here. And that's wrapping up for me. So thank you much for everybody, and thank you to Ollie for rescuing me at the last second. And I hope to see you again soon. So bye.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks
Thanks
very much.
Everybody.
Cheers. Bye bye.